Welcome to A Healthy Curiosity, the podcast that explores what it takes to be well in a busy world. With self-care strategies from Chinese medicine, functional medicine, Ayurveda, neuroscience, and beyond. I'm your host, Brody Welch, a licensed acupuncturist and transformation catalyst, here to support you on your journey of health, happiness, and personal evolution. Welcome to today's show. I'm your host, Brody Welch, a self-care strategy coach and licensed acupuncturist. And this episode today is for you if you're interested in sourcing your life from the inside out, for ditching things like comparison and perfectionism and people-pleasing, and standing up for yourself without being a dick. My guest today is Amy Smith. She is a certified confidence coach. She's a masterful speaker and personal empowerment expert. She's the founder of thejoyjunkie.com, and she uses her various roles as coach, writer, podcaster, and speaker to help move individuals to a place of radical personal empowerment and self-love. With an acute focus on helping people find their voice, she is highly sought after for her uncommon style of irreverence, wisdom, and humor, and she's been a featured expert on Fox 5 San Diego and yourtango.com. I'm super excited to have Amy Smith with us on the show today. Amy, welcome.
Thank you. I realize I'm kind of snickering and laughing at my own bio in the background. So
that's all good. I love it though, because it's like a lot of times we do feel like it's a choice between being an asshole and saying what we mean, or living in accordance with what we know we need to do for ourselves. And so why is this so difficult, do you think, for people to just have boundaries and draw them, especially with people that know us and love us?
Well, I think there's a handful of reasons, but I will say that it is disproportionately something that women grapple with far more than men, at least from the external, right? Where we can actually see burnout and we can see some of these massive issues that a lot of Western medicine isn't even addressing, thyroid disorders and adrenal fatigue, et cetera. And I think a lot of it is rooted in our primary evolution, where if we look back at primitive man, for example, if you did not belong to a society, to a tribe, to a group, that literally meant impending death, that you wouldn't survive unless you had approval or belonging to this other group. Now flash forward multiple, decades, centuries later, and here we are grappling with the same sort of primitive imprint that says, if I go for this job and I get, rejected, that must mean I might die. So sort of the iteration now has been not I must die, but I am a failure. I'm not worthy. I'm not good enough. But I really think it's important to understand this, because that's part of what we are driven to do, is actually connect with others and have favor with one another. The problem happens is when we twist and contort and sacrifice all of who we are in order to make sure everybody else is happy.
Absolutely. Yeah. Can I stop you right there? Because that is such an important point that I want to make sure gets driven home, that we are a social species. And once upon a time on the savannah, if we were kicked out of the tribe, we would die. And even in our culture today, that we are rewarded for behaviors that please others, right? Our parents will love us if we obey them, and we were rewarded in school for going along with what's asked of us, and doors open when we please the powers that be. And if we're not doing that we risk scorn, we risk being ostracized, and that does have this sort of primal, like, oh my God, I'm going to die, or I have something to be ashamed of, right? Like if I fail, if I'm rejected, if I miss the mark in some way, that shame feels like it might kill us. And it's something that we'd rather not feel. And so it becomes easier to kind of morph.
That's right. And we also have to understand that we develop that urge to make everybody else happy, or being a people pleaser or a perfectionist. Perfectionism is another example of people pleasing, right? Like I need to be perfect in everybody's eyes. And some people don't resonate with that term. And I will say, well, are you highly invested in the opinions of other people and what they think of you? Yes. Well, then that's people pleasing. And the moniker really
Yeah.
is neither here nor there. But really what's happening there on the subconscious framework, when you over and over again habitually put everybody else in front of you, that subconscious messaging is everybody else matters more than
And
me.
you. I say that all the time with
Do
respect to
you?
self-care. Yeah, that like essentially if you are blowing off what you know you need to do for yourself in terms of your exercise, your meditation, what makes you happy, what brings you joy, the kind of food that you want to be eating because somebody else needs something, like when you're overriding your own needs, you're telling yourself you don't matter. And when you're putting other people's needs first, you're telling yourself that they matter more than you. And that's like, and which is really different than serving from a place of love and serving from a place of sustainable energy. And so, like, if I can go Chinese medicine for a moment, that it's the earth elements that correlates with the organs of the spleen and stomach, which has to do with society. It has to do with fitting in socially, and it has to do with nurturing, kindness, compassion, the taste of sweet, but also groundedness. So we can't really serve and be giving and generous and loyal and rock like and solid like the planet Earth itself if we're not showing up for ourselves in that same way.
So incredibly true. And there's a quote that I say all the time that I think kind of drives this home, which is constantly and habitually putting everybody before yourself is poison disguised as nobility.
Ooh, I
Because
like that.
especially as women, right? Like we get this message that it's our duty, or I should say, many of us get this message that if you go into business, you need to be a little bit more masculine to be, or be in the yang constantly in order to be successful, because God forbid you show some emotion, right? And we think it is so noble and such a kind gesture to lay ourselves down and allow everybody else to come before us. But it is so incredibly toxic, right? I mean, I know you talk about that a lot, that's what leads to disease. That's what leads us to ailments and issues and emotional unrest when we aren't being taken care of. And it's also one of my favorite things that a colleague of mine always says is that people pleasers are fucking liars because
Yeah.
they're inauthentic. And we think about what we want to attract from most people. We want friendships and unions and connections that are totally authentic. But if you're just constantly telling people what they want to hear, you're not being honest, you're not being authentic, you're not taking care of yourself. It's a facade.
Well, and especially when you're pretending that there's no cost to you,
Yes.
and
Yes.
that's like I feel like I have gotten really good at lying to myself in terms of like, well, just that like when I bite the hook of yang addiction and I get into overriding my own boundaries, it's not so much like I'm trying to please someone else, but I am identifying, well, like maybe I'm trying to be special, or I'm trying to be successful, or I'm trying to help the world, as opposed to recognizing that there's limits to what I can do, there's limits to my energy budget, and that I actually need to pull back and do less in order to be more self-respecting, in order to walk my talk. And I think that for me especially, like I see that with whenever I get into, are they going to like me, like, or how do I look, when I get focused on like my externals, my appearance, or even just like my download numbers of the podcast, or like just
Yes.
whatever, like these metrics that we can use. Like I know clients who are measuring how much they weigh, or how like what size their
Yes.
jeans are, or whatever, and like these are all examples of people pleasing, or of outsourcing our self-worth to a culture that tells us we're only acceptable when.
Yes.
So this is really easy to say that this is the problem, and I'd love to switch gears and talk about solutions. Like how can we stop doing this?
Yes, such a great question. Well, first, I think it starts with an inventory in your life. And the easiest way to find out some of your sticking points or where you might tend to make everybody else more important is to ask yourself, what do I habitually complain about? And usually it's something that you either complain about to a party who can do nothing about it. So, for example, complaining to your spouse about your boss who you have not addressed, or complaining to your therapist over and over again about your partner, but never addressing it with your partner. A lot of times, our chronic complaining or the things that we're really upset about are really a cry for help from ourselves. And we aren't going to the appropriate party. So that's one of the first key elements, is to figure out, who are those people that I'm triggered by, that I would much rather release my frustration at the gym, or, on my poor partner or best friend or whoever, instead of actually addressing what needs to be addressed with that person. And so we hide and we do everything we possibly can to actually not use our words and ask for what we need. Why? Because nobody taught us. I mean, we think about academia and what many of our experiences are like. We didn't learn in school how to contend with fear, or how to heighten our intuition, or how self-worth is not contingent on the outside community. We don't learn any of that shit. We're just like told, hey, you better have a perfect body, better make six figures, better be partnered because you can't be single. But we have all of these criterion that we're trying to accumulate our self-worth through. And then we end up at a specific place many times in your 30s, 40s, and 50s going, holy shit, I checked off all the boxes. Why the hell am I not happy? So for everybody listening, don't let that be your scenario. Let's get ahead of that. But first, we have to take some real personal responsibility and look at, who are those people? Where are those sticking points? And sometimes it's not just one particular person, but sometimes it is a category of life. Something like, I always tend to put myself last when dealing with somebody who is really extroverted or gregarious or demonstrative, versus if I feel like I'm the strongest character in the room, I don't tend to have a lack of confidence. It might be something like that for you. It might be an area of your life, like pretty much anything related to parenting. I fall into this tiny little box, right? And I feel like everybody else is better than me. So really looking at trigger concepts in your life, areas like body or finances, your past, your future, or specific people that are highly triggering. And so here we're looking at sort of the external versus the internal. And that starts to give you a little bit more of an awareness of, here's where I need to make some progress. The next thing that I would say, as far as what to do about it, is this is a very much a concept. And I would love for everybody just to try on this concept. And it is that you are responsible for your intention, not your reception.
I couldn't agree more. That is huge. I Getting back to what you were saying about complaining, the image I get is like, when we're complaining, we're not really expecting anything to change. It's like it's lateral in its movement. It's just kind of, it
That's
just
right.
hangs out in this like sort of static side to side murky zone, as opposed to actually speaking up, like vertical communication, a vertical axis of like, you actually are asserting yourself. You're trying to instigate a change in what's going on in the status quo to make it work for you better, or to at least make it work differently than it is now.
Mhm.
The idea that you mentioned of these trigger concepts, or like, or these contextual ideas of like, oh yeah, well, I seem to do this in this context when I'm around somebody who's like this, or when I
Yes.
feel this way. To me, this comes back to like, when you're doing that, it seems like you're not valuing what you bring to the table, right? If you're looking at them and you're like, oh, well, she's so extroverted and therefore like I need to be more like this, you're inherently not seeing your own worth in that case. So it seems like that would be a really good place to investigate, like what's the story you're telling yourself, or like what parts of your own innate essence are you perhaps not valuing, because you are kind of seeing like a grass is greener, like I wish I were more like that, subconsciously.
Right. And that is also where we get it's very cyclical, but that's also where we get approval addiction, right? So if it, this is sort of the chronology of how it happens. As we are going through our formative years when we're younger, we will experience various scenario situations, messaging that we interpret. And we interpret what keeps us safe. So if we grew up in a family, let's say that you had a sibling who had special needs, and so your parents gave all of their energy and attention, perhaps you became an overachiever and felt as though you had to be scholastically astute in order to get any sort of love or affection or garner any attention. And that becomes your behavioral tactic. And so we continue that on through our adulthood. Other people develop people pleasing. The only way in which I can feel loved and safe is to make sure that everybody else is happy. So I think it's important to understand that whatever we've adopted as our habitual behavior, even if it's something like people pleasing, perfectionism, overachieving, things like that, that can very much run wild. Please know that you do that to take care of yourself. We're just trying to feel safe. And now we're at this point later on in life where we can actually tap into different tools and start to shift that and feel safe without these kind of detrimental behaviors.
Okay, Amy, I want a concrete example here because this is something that, so a lot of self-aware people who've done a lot of personal work listen to this show, and they're out there thinking like, yeah, I totally know what my pattern is. I totally see it. So what do I do when I notice that I'm about to fall into that pattern, or like I'm about to go visit my family? I'm about to jump back into the sea of like where this all came from, where I think it gets exponentially harder to kind of be our fully adult, fully evolved selves in a scenario like that. So what tips do you have to help us feel powerful and to recognize that like that is just an old pattern that doesn't need to be running the show anymore?
Well, one of my favorite things to do when you are entering into a situation where you are pretty damn sure you're going to be highly triggered, or it kicks up a lot of things happening for you. If you know that in advance, you've got a ton of ammo on your side. What I suggest doing is a quick visualization, imagination, or journaling around how do I want to feel about myself tomorrow morning when I wake up? Not how do I want my family to receive me? How do I want them to talk to me? Not anything that you cannot control. Let's look at future tripping a little bit and going, okay, after I've had this engagement with these people, how do I want to feel about myself? And then the addendum is, what are those things that I need to embody in order to be proud of the person that I am?
What a beautiful tip. I think that's so powerful because if we think about future self and doing it for her or him, that allows us to act more like the person that we want to become rather than like the person that we historically have been.
That's exactly right. And it starts to disrupt the cycle, right? Because we know, sort of from the brain imprint and the neurological wiring in our brains, right, that it's like the neural pathways. You keep going down that same road of habitual behavior, that path just gets worn more and more thin. So when you're right at the beginning of changing the behavior, it's really challenging. I mean, everybody can relate to starting a workout, right? Versus being very conditioned in a whole framework of workouts. The first 2 weeks when you start something new, you're like, what? You're reframing those neural pathways. The same happens with our behavior around our family. So having just the conscious awareness of, I'm going to go into this scenario in a different way, and then maintaining that and practicing it over and over again, that's what creates this new path that says I'm empowered versus I'm chronically obsessed with what everybody else thinks of me. So yes, and that is all cyclical, tied to self-worth, right? The more you think everybody else is better than you and you have to twist and make sure they're happy, the more you think you suck and you're not worthy, which means the more you go and do the same behavior. So we have to start switching it somewhere. And most people can start changing the behavior sooner than they can change, I believe that I'm worthy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it definitely does make sense. People-pleasing and perfectionism help us stay safe, but rarely do they help us stay healthy, assert our boundaries, speak our truth, or show up powerfully at work or in our relationships. As someone who is deeply familiar with both of these strategies and who has worked with literally thousands of clients who rely on them, I would love to coach you out of them. I can help you establish the habits that affirm your inherent worth without having to measure up to an impossible standard of perfect or making your self-care conditional on what everyone else needs from you. If you're ready to get past these social masks and really start treating yourself like someone worth taking care of, making things like meditation, sleep, proper nourishment, exercise, and finding your joy each and every day non-negotiable, head to brodywelch.com and apply to work with me. While you're there, pick up your Right to Take Care of Yourself manifesto at brodywelch.com/remind me. Now back to the show. Going back to perfectionism for a moment, you underscored the point that perfectionism helps us to avoid feeling shame. It's a way of it in and of itself is of sort of a form of people pleasing. I'm curious, like for me, perfectionism is totally an inside job. It's like
Mhm.
I feel like I've struggled with, or I'm going to rephrase that. I have been actively working with my inner critic and dismantling the power that she has over me and passing the mic to somebody more positive internally for several years now. And yet I still catch myself in having unreal standards for myself, or really that negative self-talk can be just right there when I feel like I don't meet my own standards. And I'm wondering if you have any
Mm.
advice or can speak to how you would help someone who is really just, how can we get off our own backs around things where we might have that impossible standard, or we might have not met our own expectations. That it seems to me, I mean, like self-compassion has been a tool that I've worked with a lot. I'm curious what's in your toolbox there.
Yeah, so this is such a great question. And I think one of the easiest ways to kind of look at this from a meta view is that our relationship with ourself is not dissimilar from our relationship with any other external human. In that, I'll give you an example. My husband and I have an amazing, sublimely connected relationship. We've been together for 22 years, absolutely is my soulmate. Does that mean that there aren't any blips on the radar? Does that mean that it's smooth sailing all the time? No. There's ebbs and flows. There are times when it's rocky. And the same is true for your relationship with yourself. What we're striving for is a much healthier ratio, something like 80% feeling confident and then 20% combating and using our tools and tapping into things when shit kind of hits the fan. I think that there's a really dangerous idea sort of in the personal development space that you will love yourself and magically never feel anything negative, or never succumb to fear, or never speak negatively to yourself again. And that's not the case. It's just that we're going to contend with fear, or we're going to contend with negative self-talk differently. So one of the biggest pieces is the awareness. And that's one of the things that you're talking about. You notice when you're in it. So when you're in it, your tool might be, okay, how can I exercise self-compassion here? For me, because I tend to learn a little bit more literally, I love a statement or a phrase, something I can always go to ask myself. And my key question when I'm in the weeds, or I'm starting to feel less than, or I'm slipping into that comparison is, what is my fastest avenue to peace?
Ooh,
And
okay. What is my fastest avenue to peace? Go on.
so that might look like, let's say there's a situation where you're in an argument with somebody, and it might be to close the chapter on that. Your fastest avenue to peace might be to let them have it, really go to town and express how you feel. Your fastest avenue to peace might be delete. Your fastest avenue to peace might be going for a walk, connecting with nature, if that's something that is really stimulating and healing for you. Your fastest avenue to peace might be to blow off a workout instead of holding yourself to a stringent task list. Or it might be to do some yoga. But what we have to understand is that our fastest avenue to peace is going to be absolutely different in every single circumstance. That's why it's important to start honing this relationship to self, not, oh, Amy says or
Yeah,
Brody
yeah.
says. No, it's
It's
an
funny as you
internal.
said that, I was like, wow, the fastest avenue to peace is, I feel like it would be the same answer every time, in that it would start with a breath. would start
Ooh,
with letting your breath deepen, because then you're telling your nervous system that you can relax and it's not an emergency and that you're not actually going to die. Right. And then
mm,
like bringing in comforting touch and soothing the nervous system a little bit more. And then worry about strategizing, or like maybe not worry, just go straight
yes.
to the actual strategy. But to me, it's like I would use a body hack first in order to, because like the fastest avenue to peace is always, it's always space and breath.
Yes. Yes. I thank you for bringing that up because that tactic, especially if you are highly intuitive with your body, that's your tool, right? And even if you're not, like, let's go there. But the strategy, that is what I mean by that will change every single
Absolutely.
situation.
Yes. Yeah.
The question
Yeah.
and the process is going to be the same each time.
Right. And
Yeah,
we're going to be in a better place to strategize and come up with what the situation is actually calling for when we're in our full human brain capacity and not reduced to our reactive fight or flight lizard brain.
that's right.
And
That's right.
that's what the breath can do for us. So you work a lot with people on finding their voice. And I loved, that idea of, well, like to me, finding your voice is partly about, well, speaking your truth is what comes to mind initially. And to me, it's like that also with the people in our lives, finding our voice with the people in our lives seems like it leads to that being seen and heard and understood. And especially like with people who maybe have different values from our own, and
Yes.
that I can see that sort of like the traps of, I feel like I have to go to this thing because if I don't, then this person is going to think XYZ. They're going to think I don't like them or that I don't value this relationship. When it might just be that I just need a lot of downtime, or like I'm choosing that, like, that I know that what I need is to not do a bunch of traveling on the weekend if I've had a really full week or something like that. Is
Mhm.
that part of what you would say, like that being able to actually find those words and have it land with someone, to me it seems like finding your voice and being understood, well, that finding your voice is the prerequisite to being understood by the others in our lives.
Yes, and I would say also that being understood is not a guarantee. So
Exactly.
we definitely have to, but we also know that people don't make change unless they're understood, ever. So if, again, we see this in our political stratosphere, right? If we're just chastising one another instead of saying, explain to me so I can understand you, nobody's moving. And that's the same in interpersonal relationships, familial relationships. So, what I use as sort of like a blanket mantra is do not allow your silence to make you a liar. And what that means is if something is offensive to you, if something is not going to work for your schedule, then do not allow your silence to make you a liar or what you say to make you a liar. And one of the biggest pieces of why I named my little freebie, stand up for yourself without being a dick, is this idea that we have in our society that being assertive equals being bitchy. If I actually speak up and say, no, I can't make it to your function, or no, I have to say that was actually really offensive to me, excuse me from this conversation, those are the things that we can do with kindness and grace. So for me, it's sort of this, I guess, tribrid of assertiveness paired with kindness and grace. So I feel very strongly that you can deliver the most polarizing information. You can ask for a divorce, you can ask an adult child to move out of the house, you can do all of that from a place of love and compassion and kindness and grace. So a lot of that is learning a new way to deliver information. So, for example, if you are invited to something and you feel a societal obligation or a familial obligation, I oftentimes will tell people to start with gratitude. Thank you so much for thinking of me. Thank you so much for that invite. I'll be really honest with you. My plate is incredibly full right now, and I would hate to have to pull out last minute. So I am going to have to pass this time. I truly hope you can understand.
Oh, assertive, kind, and graceful, and succinct. I love it. I'm wondering if we can take another example that people might be confronted with. especially in, well, work, family, or social environment, where somebody does say something offensive, maybe racist or sexist or homophobic, or something
Mhm.
that is an affront to our values. Seems like the fastest path to peace would be to not speak up, but yet that would make us
Yeah.
liars, in your words. And and so in this case, I'm wondering if you have some words that we can borrow,
Mm.
where we can say, I don't agree with that, or I'd appreciate that, like, that language is offensive to me, or like, what's in your toolbox? Do you have a go-to?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things to think about here. First of all, for me, and I would guess that this might be the same for you too, Brody, is I don't feel peaceful if I'm out of integrity.
Exactly.
So it's not peaceful for me to just roll over and allow somebody to say, because again, there I am acting like I'm complicit, and I'm okay with that. And I've had that exact situation. So I used to do some community theater, and I had a person who I was doing a show with show me a really offensive meme that was incredibly degrading to a child who was both mentally and physically disabled. So to me, that does not constitute comedy by any stretch of the imagination. And so he's showing it to me kind of in like a, ha ha, are you going to collude with me and enjoy this with me? So I was at that exact pivotal moment. Do I acquiesce and just make him happy and then walk away? Or do I stand in my own integrity? I don't need to get into a full-blown conversation. But what I said was, you know what, I actually find that fairly offensive. I would really appreciate it if you just don't show me that stuff anymore. See you in like 5 minutes, and then like walked away. So one of the things that I think we get stuck in is we think if I say, hey, that's offensive to me, or hey, I don't want to be a part of this conversation, that we now have to get in a full on conversation about gun rights or
Right.
about,
That there has
you
to
know,
be heat, or it has to be this
yeah,
big prolonged thing, when actually you're just drawing a boundary. And it seems like you made a very clear and concrete request, like, please don't show me this again. And then you extricated yourself from the situation.
that's right. That's right. And I've done that with my brother
Yeah.
before.
Okay.
Like,
So say it's
yeah,
say it's your in-laws. Say it's somebody
yeah,
whose, like, opinion matters to you, because you
yeah,
know that your partner, you don't want your partner to be upset with you, like, your partner values everybody getting along. But,
yeah.
so, like, you have a vested interest in keeping everybody happy, but you still need to draw a boundary, and maybe it's Thanksgiving dinner.
Yep.
Go.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it really it depends on the nature of the dynamic.
Mhm.
I tend to use humor as a gateway. So there's a couple of tactics that you can employ. One is to start with, if you're kind of a smartass like me, to start off with something that's in jest, like "Whoa, hello, racist," or something like that, or like "Wow, okay, so we know how you stand on women's rights." Or something like that. And then this is the very important part. You don't get to just be a smartass. You have to use that as a gateway and say, on a serious note, or for reals though.
Mhm.
That is a little bit, that's fairly disparaging to women, and we don't need to get into it, but I'm suffice it to say, yeah, that landed a little offensively over here.
I love that so much. So, okay, so there's the humorous interrupt, followed by the sober, let's get real for a minute,
Yes.
and that's still, kind, graceful, and assertive.
Yes. Those tend to work better in group environments where it's like, whoa, that got awkward, where you can kind of diffuse it a little bit
Yeah.
with humor or jest or something like that. And then go in, but for reals though, or on a serious note, or in all seriousness, yeah, that does have a little offensive tone,
Well,
or something like
and it also seems like at that point, if somebody's intention is to, like, stir things up, right? Because we're not all people that value harmony and getting along, right?
that. Right.
If somebody wants to just be provocative, and, like, then you are successfully not taking the bait. You're just laying down, this isn't okay with you.
That's right. Now, if it is a situation where it is more one on one of my favorite tactics to use is to talk about intention, what you assume their intention is, or what you assume their intention is not. So to say something like, hey, in law, I I so appreciate this amazing dinner you had, or whatever, something positive. And I seriously doubt it is your intention at all to cast blame or ruffle feathers. But I have to be really honest. That comment about blop landed with me like this. So instead of saying you're being a racist, you're being this, but to say, when you said this, here's how I interpreted it.
Yeah. So
And
you're giving them insight into your perspective as opposed
yes.
to assigning motive to their actions.
And then you have because it's not combative, we know, obviously, energetically, if you are approaching from a place of vulnerability, you are more likely to elicit vulnerability in return. Versus if you go in guns blazing, you're more likely to elicit guns blazing from the alternative side. That's one of the hardest things for us, is to enter in weapon free, to enter in from a place of vulnerability. But the reason you do that is to get that person to engage with you, or it's more likely that they will engage with you from a softer place where they can say, oh my gosh, I did not intend that at all. What do you mean that's offensive? Well, oh, well, you know what? I used to not know this either, but Indigenous people really prefer da 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 da. Or you could educate. There's opportunities to teach when we're not being holier than thou and biting and acrimonious.
Really true. That from a Chinese medicine standpoint, the element that has to do with being assertive and standing up for ourselves or for others, being an ally, that has to do with upward, outward energy is the wood element. This is the liver and
Mm.
gallbladder. And so in the gallbladder, in both in English and in Chinese, there's an expression that so and so has a big gallbladder, meaning that they're brave, they're audacious, they have the audacity to say what they mean, right? That oh yeah, she has a lot of gall, right? That means that
Oh, I love it.
she's being brave. She is standing in her truth despite what other people think. And the thing with the wood elements is like a tree that pents up emotion, pents up like not saying your truth for a long period of time. When it finally comes out, can be quite volcanic. It can be over the top and fiery, as opposed to simply like a tree just doing its thing. Like, yes, it disrupts the earth, it's moving upward and outward in this steady way, but it's not aggressive in it. It's assertive without being aggressive, and also without not doing its thing, right? It's not buried by the earth, stuck in the mud. It is in fact growing in this assertive upward direction. So that's an archetype that I like to tap into, is feeling like I've got my roots into the earth, and that like a tree, I can be flexible and adaptable, but at the same time, it's not going to stop me from moving in the direction I need to go or voicing what I need to say.
Right. Or being sturdy,
Yeah.
sturdy and strong. I absolutely love that as an image to anchor you in. And, talking specifically about some of these tactics that you can use if you're going into a situation where it's not necessarily somebody has said something offensive, but where you need to broach something with somebody. Let's say it's in-laws who are feeding your children high fructose corn syrup or something that you don't want them to consume. Going to them, and instead of assuming their intention, you can say what your intention is or is not. So, hey, so and so, thank you so much for talking with me. Listen, I wanted to just bring something up with you, and please know my intention is not at all to whatever it is, disrupt the family, cause issues, blah blah blah. My intention is genuinely to have the most open communication possible. And I know that where your heart's at and blah, 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 whatever. And then you can say, and here's my request. And that would fall more into a boundary category. Here's the thing that I will or will not tolerate any longer. But just that statement of, because I'm sure you hear this all the time too, where people go, I just don't want them to think this. I don't want them to think that. I'm like, then tell them. Tell them
Exactly.
exactly where you're coming from. Tell them,
Right. My
I
resistance to
don't
saying
view you in
this
this way.
is that I don't
Yes.
want to offend you, or yeah.
Please know it is not my intention to offend. Whatever, just tell them that. Or say, I'll be honest, I have been so concerned about bringing this to you because the last thing I would want you to hear is that I don't care or that I'm not appreciative of you watching the kids. Say that, get that stuff out so that you can then make the request and they're not making up a bunch of stories of, well, this ungrateful daughter-in-law of mine or son-in-law who doesn't appreciate that we're watching the kids for them. All they want to do is, complain about the soda we give them or whatever. It worked fine for me when I was a kid, whatever it
Yes.
happens to be. You start to take away that armor a little bit.
Amy, you have such a way with words, and I'm sure do an amazing job helping people tap into their confidence and to be able to find their voice. I know that you offer this free e-workbook at your website, thejoyjunkie.com/free. There's a link that's going to be in the show notes. Is that the best place to get in touch with you if people are interested in learning more about how to stand up for themselves without being a dick?
Yes, it's so wonderful to hear your beautiful melodic voice say that title. It's such a dichotomy. But yes, I basically everywhere on the internet, you can find me under the handle of the Joy Junkie, and Junkie is Junkie. And I too have a podcast, The Joy Junkie Show, lots of freebie stuff for you to sink your teeth into. And yeah, I'd be incredibly honored for anybody to learn more about my work. And yeah, that's my corner of the internet.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Amy. I have learned a lot in talking with you and really appreciate your time.
Oh, I've had a blast.
Thanks for listening today. To check out the show notes, get on my email list, or drop me a line, head to brodywelch.com. That's Brody with an IE and Welch with a CH. I'd love to hear from you. If you learned something new or feel inspired to try something different in your life, I'd love for you to pay it forward by sharing this episode with a friend who you think could also benefit, and give them a reason to listen. You'll be helping to create a world where we encourage each other to embody self-respect. Till next time, be good to yourself.